How many of you know Paul Guiragossian? Wow.
I'll pay you later. Raise
all the
your
foreigners
hands.
and a few Egyptians. Manuella, give us an interesting idea of who Paul Guiragossian, his background, and him as an artist.
Paul's parents were survivors of, Paul is Armenian by origin, so his parents survived the Armenian genocide, and they ended up in the Middle East between, from Syria to Lebanon to Palestine, and Paul was born in Jerusalem. And at one point, because his father, and they needed to find a way, a living, and his father went away to start looking for work, and his mother had him and two sons. He had him and a brother. His mother, Rahel, whose drawing we used for the logo of our foundation, by the way, because she has a huge significance in Paul's life and artistic career later. So his mother had lost children from a first marriage during this the war, and so with Paul and his brother, she wanted to make sure that they get an education. So very early on, she placed them in boarding schools. First with the French nuns, and he was 4 years old and onwards, and then with the Italian priests, one in Bethlehem and then in Jerusalem. While he was in school, Paul used to draw a lot, and he thought everybody is like him. Everybody can draw. This wasn't anything special, until he realized that all the other kids, when they start making kites and doing, they would come to him to make the designs. And the nuns would bring him pictures of the saints for him to reproduce. And so he realized that, oh, there's something special about his talent, that it's different than the others. And his love for drawing kept going and increasing. Now, throughout this period, Paul never met his father until, he met his father only until he was 9 years old. And he met him briefly. And his father passed away. He was a musician. He was also blinded during all the situations that they survived from. And so it was a really rough upbringing. And he always said later on that he never grew up with his mother's affection and the woman's affection until he met my mother. And I think throughout the time where he was in Palestine, he had some, unofficial teachers that, but he had a passion for the old Italian masters. And so he would go and look at books and reproduce, the artworks of the great masters of the Renaissance. And then he even had at one point studied Khat Arabi with a Muslim sheikh from his neighborhood. And so he had very different experiences as he was growing up, and always drawing. He worked odd jobs like assistant to car mechanics. He was a kid, like at 14, at 13, And so there's a very important and sensitive point that he thought as a child, that because he is naughty, that's why his mother keeps him in the schools. And so he asked her once, and this is with بلهجته بالعربي راح أقولها خديني وجربيني, try me. So eventually they ended up in Jaffa, and then at the point where they evacuated or migrated people to Lebanon in the late 47, 48, my father and his brother and mother came to Beirut. He had done a self-portrait in oil through the mirror that was very important for him at the time, very realistic. And he left it behind because they were told, you're coming back in 2 weeks. So when he came to Beirut, he did another self-portrait, very, very realistic. And this portrait has such importance for him that during the civil war in Lebanon, it would go down to the shelters with us. It would travel all over. It was always here under his armpit. He takes it with him everywhere. Today, when we do major exhibitions and retrospectives, after hanging everything, everything is transported, insured, this portrait goes specifically with me, personally. So when Paul landed in Beirut, they went to the old Armenian neighborhoods, you know, and they were poor. They had to start making a living. And so he started teaching in schools, in the Armenian schools in the Armenian neighborhood. And him and his brother had the talent for khat. So they started working as doing illustrations and banners and things like that. And then he had a small corner wherever they were living where he would continue painting, and he would do portraits of the neighbors. He would go out and paint the attalin, the mothers, the people in the crowd, the souq. And because he was out of work, so he was painting people out of work. Basically, it was like a journal. And if there's a funeral going in the street, he would follow them with his sketchbooks, and he would, like a reporter, you know, start sketching, and then multiple sketches would run back to the studio, and then start, you know, picking from them, or maybe one, and then making that into a painting, or a wedding, or all of these. So he would literally go with them in the street neighborhood. And one day, a well-known art critic was passing by, and an artist. They were passing on his street, and from the window they see this young man painting inside, and they went in there, and they got to know him. And so they loved his work, they loved his mind. He's very inquisitive, and he's self-taught so far. So they took him and introduced him to other artists and to the society, the art society in Beirut. They pushed him to start participating in salons, Salon d'automne, Salon de printemps, and the government at the time, the Ministry of Culture, used to organize these salons at the UNESCO, and these, you know, then the Sersoq Museum that's famous in Beirut also later in the 60s, early 60s. So participating here and there. His very first exhibition was in a coffee shop run by a Hungarian art lover. So it was a small place with very regular seats, and then Paul was allowed to hang his paintings there. So it started out small like that, and then gradually Paul became the most beloved artist in Beirut. There were awards given by the Italians, then the French. He won a scholarship to Florence in the late 50s, 57, 58. And so he went there, and he spoke Italian already from his childhood. So he went there and did a stage. And for the first time ever, Paul met his beloved old masters in person. So this made a huge difference in his life. And then later he won a second bourse scholarship to Paris, and this was in the early 60s, 61, 62, 63, and he went to Paris and studied. What is great about my father's life is that he met my mom, who was also an artist, and her name is Juliette, and this woman studied art with him because her parents, you know, encouraged her, and Paul became her teacher, then fell in love. Juliette never exhibited her paintings because she believed that Paul is the one who needs to, you know, show his work. And so she was his muse, his model. She raised his kids. She prepared his exhibitions. She stretched his canvases. And she did absolutely everything to make sure that he gets to work in his studio without, you know, worrying about everything. And Paul trusted her so much that he relied on her, and he gave her, Paul hates money, so any money he made, he gave to Juliette. It wasn't much in the beginning, but gradually they grew together to become, you know, I mean, for Paul to become as well known as he became. And he did a lot of exhibitions, solo and collective, all over the world. He was invited constantly by governments, you know, to come in the national institutions that they had to do retrospectives and exhibitions. And Paul was a brilliant connoisseur of ancient civilizations, mainly also, specifically Egyptian. He was a huge lover of of the Egyptian civilization. So he used to talk about, he would give conferences. Anytime he gave a show, a lot of artists, a lot of art lovers would come. Many artists that I met from a bit younger generation than Paul, from all over the Arab world, would tell me, and I hear this until today, when your father came to this so-and-so exhibition, I used to go just to listen to him speak. He talked about his contemporary artists that he distinguished, that he loved. He talked about other artists from Iraq, from Egypt, what they were doing, what were the things that needed to change, what were the things that were right, that should. And he was a great believer that artists from the region need to discuss their environment, because our pain is ours. You know, Europe paints Orientalism, but they're not Oriental. They're not from here to understand wadana, our, you know, our happiness, our pains, our situations. No one better than us would know how to explain this, how to express this. And so Paul continued to evolve. His work developed and became more and more abstract already from the mid to late 60s. But what was funny is that he had two sides, and by force, because buyers, you know, you have a family, you want to raise them, so buyers would understand the figuration, the figurative works, the mother and child. So he would paint that, and for himself, he would go super abstract and minimal. And those are the works that he would exhibit in the States and in Europe. And then in Lebanon, you would have the traditional, you know, more figurative paintings. Eventually, Paul kept touring, and the more time went by, he became, you know, during the Civil War, unfortunately, Beirut was split in two. You had the East and West. All the main galleries were in the Gharbiyeh. And so we were more on the other side, and Paul decided that this is not going to stop him. So he started doing exhibitions all over the different towns. He would go to the north, do a show. He would go to Bekaa, to the, you know, different areas in major halls, in churches, you name it, in hotels. He kept doing exhibitions because he felt that people needed to continue being educated through art and come see exhibitions even under bombings and under all of this. And at the same time, he was still getting invited and traveling to do shows in the States. He toured in 1987 in the United States. He did probably about 7 to 8 exhibitions. And Paul is very prolific. He was a fast artist. And we don't have a specific number, but we have an estimate, which is around 5,000 paintings. But these paintings are all over the world, and the archiving is still ongoing. It's very rich.
We'll come to that, yeah.